Hey guys, tonight we're trading straw beds and chamber pots for something a little louder, hotter, and far more likely to explode in your face. We're crawling inside one of the most feared machines of World War II, the German Panther tank, to see what life was really like for the 5 men trapped inside it during the Normandy campaign. Forget the clean, cinematic tank battles you've seen in movies, with heroic music and perfect visibility. The truth is more sweat, smoke, grinding gears, and the constant reminder that you're sitting on several tons of ammunition in an environment designed by someone who clearly hated comfort. You probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, make sure you're somewhere you can relax, maybe with a drink that doesn't smell like diesel fuel. Dim the lights, let the background hum of whatever's around you fade into white noise, and try to imagine the constant metallic vibration of a tank engine under your feet. You've just been assigned to a Panther in the summer of 1944. The good news? You're in one of the most advanced tanks of the war. The bad news? So is everyone else you're fighting against, and they all want yours turned into scrap metal. And you slide into the cramped steel hull, feeling the air get heavier with each step down. The walls close in instantly. There's no room to stretch, no seat you'd actually call a seat, and every surface is either sharp, greasy, or hot enough to burn skin. The floor smells like a mix of burnt oil, stale bread, and the faint metallic tang of shell casings. Light barely filters through the periscopes, giving everything a dim, submarine-like gloom. Somewhere deep inside, the Maybach engine rumbles, even when idle, sending a low vibration up through your boots. It's the kind of place where even when nothing's happening, you're already sweating, already tense, already wishing you were anywhere else. And that's before the first shell lands nearby. From here on out, we're going to move through a day inside this thing. Every sound, every smell, every uncomfortable detail. No training montage, no breaks for scenery. Just the reality of surviving inside 45 tons of noisy, moving metal, while the world outside is doing its best to turn you into history. You're standing in the pre-dawn damp of Normandy, and the air is thick enough to chew. Everything smells faintly of wet earth, exhaust, and the ghost of last night's shelling. Somewhere off in the hedgerows, an MG42 chatters at nothing in particular, just someone's idea of reminding the enemy they're still awake. You've been told to report to your vehicle. Not a car, not a truck, not anything resembling a sane mode of transport, but the German Panzerkampfwagen V, the Panther. It squats there on the churned mud like an angry, hulking animal. Its long 75mm gun pointing out over the hedgerows, daring someone to be stupid enough to poke it. The outside is deceptively still. From 10 feet away, it's just steel, paint, and mud, the sort of thing you could mistake for invincibility if you didn't know better. But you do know better. You've already been briefed, and you've heard stories from crews who came back with fewer members than they started with. This thing is a weapon, yes, but it's also a trap. A mobile coffin with treads. The enemy knows its silhouette the same way they know the shape of their own helmets, and the second you're spotted, there's a whole catalogue of unpleasant ways this day can end. The first thing you notice up close is how massive it really is. The glacis plate looms above you, armour thick enough to shrug off most Sherman shells at range, though that's less comforting when you realise the people shooting at you have figured out where to aim anyway. The sides are caked in dried mud and grass from the last position change, the track links carrying half the countryside in their cleats. There's no easy way in, just a handful of hatches set into the armour like sealed tomb doors. You clamber up the side, boots slipping against steel that still holds the cold of the night, and grab at whatever protrusions you can find, careful not to smash your fingers in the metal fittings. The hatch is smaller than you want it to be. Everything about it feels like it was designed for a man half your size and with half the gear. You slide the latch, feel the reluctant groan of a mechanism that's been exposed to rain, dust, and the occasional bump from a stray branch, and haul it open. The smell hits immediately. Hot oil, cordite residue, sweat that's been baked in and cooled and baked in again, a stale tang of tinned food, and the faint but inescapable whiff of exhaust that leaks in no matter how good the seals are. It's not a smell you'll ever wash out of your clothes. Getting inside isn't just stepping in. It's a careful, awkward shuffle. One boot down onto the seat frame, one hand braced against the breech guard, twisting your shoulders to avoid smashing into the traversing mechanism, then lowering yourself down until your knees are higher than you want them to be, and your feet have found whatever small patch of floor isn't already occupied by ammunition or equipment. The steel walls are close enough that turning your head too fast means bumping your helmet against something, usually something sharp. The only light comes from tiny slits in the armour, and whatever dust-choked bulb the crew wired up months ago. It's a dull yellow glow that makes every surface look greasy. You're not alone, of course. This is a 5-man crew, and you've just joined 4 men who have been living in this space like it's a bad apartment they can't afford to leave. The commander is perched in his seat under the cupola, headset on, already scanning through the periscopes like he's trying to read the day's bad news before it arrives. The gunner sits to his front right, eye glued to the scope, hands resting on the elevation and traverse controls with the twitchy patience of someone who's learned that things can go from quiet to chaos in seconds. The loader, squeezed in on the left, is wedged between racks of 75mm shells the size of fire extinguishers, his knees bumping into the base of the gun as he checks each round's casing for damage. Down in the front, the driver is already strapped in, hands on the control levers, eyes on the narrow vision slit like it's the only thing tethering him to reality. Beside him, the radio operator leans over the set, fiddling with knobs, sending out short bursts of static-laced German into the air. The air inside is warmer than outside, even with the engine still cold. There's a stillness, but not the good kind. It's the kind where everyone is just waiting for the inevitable command to move. You shift in your seat, and there's no comfortable position. The padding is thin and uneven, and your knees are jammed against metal that has no give. Every bump, every vibration is transmitted straight into bone. There's no space for a bag, no space for a coat, and no space for the idea that you might be able to stretch later. You're part of the machinery now, just another component crammed into a steel box. When the commander finally gives the nod, the driver reaches over and engages the starter. The Maybach HL230 roars to life behind you with a deafening metallic cough, then settles into a deep, throaty growl that shakes the whole compartment. The air instantly changes, warm, oily, and heavy. You can feel it in your lungs. The vibrations run through the seat, up your spine, and into your teeth. Conversation becomes a half-shouted affair, words broken and lost under the constant mechanical thunder. The smell of exhaust thickens, even with the vents open. You realise you're already breathing harder than you were a few minutes ago. Outside, the world is waking up in its own violent way. The sound of distant artillery rolls over the fields, some of it German, some not. Aircraft engines drone somewhere beyond the low cloud ceiling. The driver eases the tank forward, and you feel the first lurch of the treads biting into soft ground. Every gear change is a wrestling match between man and machine, each shift accompanied by a metallic clank that echoes through the hull. The suspension groans over uneven ground, and you're already bracing yourself against the nearest solid surface, because balance inside here is a privilege you never really have. Through it all, there's an unspoken understanding. This is it. This steel box is home, workplace, and maybe your final address. The armour feels solid now, but everyone knows what happens when a shell finds the right spot. You don't just think about the enemy out there. You think about what it will feel like when the world outside turns white hot for a second, and the inside becomes something you'd rather not imagine. The commander calls for a halt, scanning the terrain ahead. The gunner adjusts the elevation slightly. The loader checks the next round. The driver keeps his hands ready. Every man knows his role. Every movement is rehearsed, but the space between them is tight enough that one careless shift can knock someone's elbow or send a knee into a control lever. There's no glamour in here. It's all sharp edges, constant noise, and the reminder that you're moving through Normandy in a machine that's both predator and target. Somewhere ahead, beyond the narrow viewports and armoured glass, there's an enemy who can hear you coming just as clearly as you can hear your own engine. And if you make it through this hour, there's another one waiting, and another after that. The first seconds of movement are jarring enough, but nothing wakes you up inside a Panther like the battlefield itself. Forget gentle alarms or the smell of breakfast drifting from another room. Your morning greeting comes from the sound of high-velocity metal slicing the air somewhere way too close for comfort. Even before the hatch seals behind you, there's a staccato rhythm to the outside world. Distant bursts from artillery, the sharp, urgent crack of rifles, and the deeper, slower thump of tank guns announcing that someone's already awake and already trying to ruin your day. Inside, the steel hull turns those outside noises into a muffled, metallic echo. A drumbeat you feel as much as you hear. The engine has settled into a constant roar, but every new impact outside has its own signature. You learn quickly to tell the difference between friendly fire in the distance and incoming trouble aimed more or less in your direction. A round slamming into earth 100 meters away sends a dull, solid shudder through the frame. One landing closer makes the whole compartment jerk like a train car hitting a bad section of track. There's no such thing as gently waking up. Even if you had managed to close your eyes for a few minutes before dawn, the first lurch forward would have sent your head into the backrest and your helmet into the periscope housing. The driver calls something over his shoulder, but it's half swallowed by the engine. The commander's voice cuts in over the intercom, clipped, fast, and edged with the kind of tension you don't need explained. He's already spotting movement through the cupola. The gunner straightens in his seat, adjusting the traverse hand wheel by instinct. The loader, who was leaning back for just a second, sits forward and places both hands on the nearest shell. They're not waiting for orders to start their tasks. It's muscle memory by now. You can smell the cordite from yesterday's last engagement still clinging to the breech. A faint metallic chemical sting that mixes with the tang of fuel vapours drifting in from the engine bay. Then comes the unmistakable sound of return fire. A sharp, whistling rush. Too fast for your mind to fully process before it ends in a flat, angry crack somewhere just off the hull. The vibration rattles your teeth. The metal under your boots humming for a heartbeat longer than you'd like. You don't have time to think about what would have happened if it had been a metre to the left. The commander barks a range estimate, the gunner lines up, and the loader swings around into the breach in one practiced motion. The locking mechanism slams shut, and the gunner squeezes the trigger. The inside of the tank becomes a brief, violent storm. The blast shoving hot air past your face, the recoil slamming backward into its stops, the smell of propellant rushing to fill every cubic inch of space. The commander is already calling for traverse adjustments before the sound of your own shot fades. You realise your hands are braced hard against the nearest surface, knuckles white, even though you're not the one working the controls. Out there in the hedgerows, the morning light is filtering through low clouds, turning everything into a grey-green smear through the viewports. The driver wrestles the Panther forward, treads grinding over mud, roots, and whatever else is in the way. Every bump jolts the crew into one another, knees and elbows finding each other in the confined space. There's no good place to be when the tank's in motion. You're either being thrown forward, slammed sideways, or pushed back into something unyielding. The radio operator keeps glancing up from his set, headset cord swinging as he twists to catch fragments of conversation. Orders are coming in from the company net. Position changes, contact reports, the occasional frantic call for support. It's all delivered in the same tone, whether the message is to advance 100 metres or to brace for incoming. Another shell lands closer, this time spraying the outside with a rattle of dirt and shrapnel. The sound is different, sharper, harder, and everyone in the crew compartment notices. The commander's voice tightens, the gunner's movements get a fraction faster. The loader keeps his other hand on the next round. Even the driver seems to be coaxing more speed out of the gearbox, though the Panther makes its own decisions about how fast it wants to go. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you register that this is just how mornings start here, with your senses on full alert, your hearing straining past the engine noise, and your muscles tensed for the next impact. The war doesn't care if you've had coffee yet. Out here, waking up means realising you've already been in danger for several minutes and that it's not going to stop anytime soon. And as the tank lumbers toward its firing position, the air inside growing hotter with every metre, you know this is just the beginning of the day's rhythm. A steady, grinding march between moments of sudden chaos, each one loud enough to wipe away whatever you thought you were prepared for when you climbed in. The hedgerows are closer now, and whatever's on the other side is waiting. You'd think a war machine the size of a small house might have some sort of system for keeping the people inside it halfway clean, but the Panther has as much interest in your personal hygiene as it does in your love life. None at all. The first thing you realise after a few hours inside is that every smell clings. It's not just the engine fumes, it's the grease smeared into every surface, the faint, sweet metal tang of gun oil, the cordite from yesterday's shells, and the warm, human layer of sweat from 5 men who have been wearing the same uniforms for days. There's no bathroom sink here, no mirror to check if you look alive. Hygiene is whatever you can manage between bursts of incoming fire and orders to move. Brushing your teeth, if you even bother, means digging a battered toothbrush from the depths of your kit. wedging yourself into a corner where you won't knock over a shell rack, and swishing with whatever water you dared to carry. Most of the time, that water isn't for drinking or rinsing. It's for the radiator, or for keeping the crew from passing out when the inside temperature climbs past comfort. If you're lucky enough to have coffee left over from breakfast, you use it to chase the taste of morning mouth, which is mostly stale bread and exhaust. Shaving? That's a luxury you forgot about the moment you climbed in. Razors go blunt fast in the field, and the only mirror is a handheld signal glass that rattles around in the commander's kit. If you do try, you'll probably cut yourself the first time the tank lurches over a rut, leaving you with a neat little line of dried blood along your jaw until the next time you can actually wash. And you can forget about a change of clothes. The wool tunic you're wearing already has a week's worth of grime ground into it, plus the occasional smear of black from leaning against the turret wall. The gloves, once a tidy brown leather, now look like you've been wrestling carburetors in a coal mine. The smell of fuel is everywhere. You breathe it, it seeps into your skin, and it flavours whatever you put in your mouth. Open a can of tinned meat, and you'll still taste diesel on the first bite. Wipe your face with a rag, and it leaves behind the scent of gearbox oil. Even the air you're pulling into your lungs has passed over the Maybach engine, picking up a subtle cocktail of hot metal and burned petrol. After a while, you stop noticing, until you open the hatch for fresh air and realise your sense of fresh has shifted somewhere between garage and munitions dump. Washing your hands if you bother is with a splash from your canteen and a scrap of cloth that's already dirty from wiping down the breach. Soap isn't part of the Panther's standard equipment, and carrying it is a personal decision most crewmen abandon after the second week in the field. If you're the loader, your hands are constantly blackened from the shell casings and the breech block. If you're the driver, they're a mix of grease, sweat, and whatever dust blew in through the slit. The smell sticks so well, you could probably still find it days after leaving the tank. Your breath is a different battle entirely. The combination of bad sleep, tinned food, instant coffee, and the ambient layer of fuel vapour makes for something you wouldn't inflict on your worst enemy. Nobody comments. Everyone's in the same condition. But you can feel it when you talk. The warm, recycled air just carries it around the compartment, mingling with everyone else's. Some crews keep mints or hard candy in their pockets, but they melt or turn to sticky lumps in the summer heat. Gum is rare, and when someone has it, they guard it like gold. After a while, you stop thinking about clean in the civilian sense. You think about whether you're tolerable enough to keep functioning without making yourself sick. A quick wipe with a rag across the back of your neck. A splash of canteen water over your face. Maybe running a comb through hair that hasn't been washed in a week. That's the new version of fresh. The goal isn't to look good. The goal is to not feel like you've been sleeping in an oil drum for 3 days straight, even though you have. And just when you've finished your abbreviated morning routine and wedged yourself back into position, the commander calls for a hatch to be closed, sealing the compartment again. The faint draft you had disappears, replaced by the same warm, heavy atmosphere you woke up in, carrying every familiar scent back into your lungs. Out here, hygiene isn't a routine. It's a passing thought, chased away by the next order to move, the next gear shift, and the next reminder that inside a Panther, smelling like diesel is just part of breathing. Breakfast happens whenever the commander decides there's a few minutes where no one's shooting directly at you, which means it's rarely at the same time twice. There's no dining table, no plates, and definitely no polite conversation. Meals in a panther are improvised acts of survival, crammed between your knees and whatever ammunition rack you're wedged against. If you're lucky, someone remembered to bring rations before you rolled out. The German field ration is a modest affair. A tin of Fleischkonserve, basically meat paste that ranges in texture from stiff pâté to something that looks like it escaped from a factory floor drain. A few slices of black bread that crumble into gravel the second you bite them, and maybe a packet of ersatz coffee. If the supply truck had a good week, there's margarine or a cube of processed cheese, which you immediately guard from the rest of the crew, because you know it'll disappear the second you look away. The loader works the can opener, his elbows bumping the gunner's shoulder every time the tank rocks. The bread is passed around in hunks torn by hand, because knives are in short supply, and the ones you have are busy doubling as screwdrivers or track tools. Every movement is awkward in the confined space. You can't turn your torso without bumping into someone, or knocking a ration tin onto the floor, where it'll roll under a seat and pick up a new coat of grease before you can fish it out. Coffee is brewed in the most primitive way possible. A dented mess tin balanced over a small solid fuel stove that the crew guards like it's more valuable than the main gun. The smell of it cuts through the air instantly, riding over the lingering engine fumes and stale sweat. It's strong, bitter, and full of grounds, but it's hot, and that's all that matters. Everyone takes a few sips before passing it on. Mugs aren't standard issue. You drink from whatever's available. An empty ration tin, a metal cup dented beyond recognition, or straight from the pot if no one's looking. Breakfast inside the tank is noisy. Someone's chewing too close to your ear. Someone else is using a bayonet to scrape the last of the meat paste from the tin, and the constant rumble of the idling engine makes the coffee slosh out of the mess tin every time the driver adjusts his seat. The smell of food barely masks the other smells in the compartment. Instead, it blends into them, creating an atmosphere where every breath is a reminder that you're eating in a space shared with 4 other men, a pile of ammunition, and a live engine. There's no time to savour anything. The commander might call for movement at any second, and if you're mid-bite when that happens, you either swallow fast or hold onto your food while the tank lurches forward. More than one man has ended up with coffee in his lap because someone spotted movement through the periscope. A can of meat knocked over during a sharp turn will leave a greasy slick on the floor that no one bothers to clean. The next boot will just smear it deeper into the grime. You eat quickly, not because you're in a rush to get back to work, but because food cools fast in the steel shell. Cold coffee tastes like burnt water, and cold meat paste somehow tastes more metallic than when it's warm. Breadcrumbs get everywhere, sticking to your gloves, your tunic, even your face if you're not paying attention. In the tight space, there's no brushing them off without brushing them onto someone else. And then, just as you're halfway through your portion, the radio operator gets a burst of static and leans toward the commander. A quick exchange over the intercom, and the word is given, "Move out." Everyone stows what they can. The coffee pot is shoved into a corner where it will rattle against the wall until someone remembers to drink the rest. Half-eaten bread disappears back into jacket pockets where it will get crushed before lunch. The meat tin is jammed shut and set on top of the transmission housing, where the heat will keep it warm until someone finishes it later. The driver pulls the levers, the engine note climbs, and the tank begins to crawl forward again. Breakfast is officially over, not because anyone's full, but because the battlefield doesn't care whether you've eaten. Hunger will be a constant companion for the rest of the day, and you'll get used to ignoring it until the next brief halt, whenever that might be. Inside the Panther, meals aren't events. They're interruptions. Brief pauses in the grinding noise of treads and gears, and they end as abruptly as they start. Getting dressed inside a Panther isn't a morning routine. It's a calculated process of layering yourself in enough gear to stay alive without making it impossible to fit through the hatch or move inside the cramped steel box. The first thing you pull on is the uniform. Feldgrau wool, cut for durability rather than comfort, and guaranteed to itch in all the places you can't scratch once you're in position. It already smells faintly of the last week's work. Engine oil from leaning against the hull, a streak of soot across one sleeve from the exhaust vent, and the stubborn, sour scent of sweat that's seeped into the fibres. Washing it isn't an option out here, so you just keep wearing it until it can almost stand up on its own. Over the tunic goes the belt, webbing, and whatever small kit you're keeping on your person. In the open, you'd carry a pistol, extra magazines, maybe a map case, but inside the tank, you're conscious of every protrusion. A bulky sidearm holster might catch on the loader's elbow or wedge between the elevation wheel and the side of the turret at the worst possible moment. The same goes for anything hanging off your belt. Too much, and you're constantly snagging on something every time you shift in your seat. Boots are heavy leather, stiff from constant exposure to mud and water. The soles patterned with half the dirt of Normandy. They're worn every day, on and off the tank, and they've moulded to your feet in a way that's equal parts comfort and permanent ache. The laces are caked with dried mud that no one has time to scrape off, and the insides are lined with the faint grit of sand that works its way in no matter how often you shake them out. Thick socks are supposed to help, but they're rarely dry by the second day in the field. Gloves are non-negotiable. The metal inside the tank is unforgiving. Every lever, crank, and hatch edge is ready to slice into bare skin. Most crews used leatherwork gloves, worn shiny on the palms from gripping the same controls over and over. They're already darkened with oil stains that never wash out, the fingertips slightly frayed from snagging on ammunition casings. Without them, you'd have blisters on both hands before noon. Then there's the headgear. The standard padded tanker helmet is meant to protect your skull from the constant knocks against the inside of the hull, and it does, but it also traps heat like an oven. The padding absorbs sweat, holding it close enough that you can smell yesterday's work every time you shift it on your head. The integrated headset presses against your ears, the cord dangling over your shoulder to connect into the intercom system. The only way you can hear the commander's voice over the roar of the Maybach engine. If the weather's bad, and in Normandy it often is, you might add a waterproof overjacket before climbing in. It's another layer to overheat in, but it keeps the worst of the rain off when you're outside the tank, fixing a thrown track or waiting for fuel. The downside is that it makes you bulkier, which in a turret the size of a walk-in closet means you're bumping into someone every time you turn. The last step is checking your pockets. Cigarettes, a lighter, maybe a small folding knife, a couple of hard candies if you've been lucky in the supply drop. These aren't luxuries, they're survival aids for the long hours ahead. The candies help cut the taste of stale coffee, The cigarettes are for the brief stops when you can stick your head out of the hatch, and the knife is for everything from opening rations to cutting a jammed strap. By the time you're fully dressed, you're already warm, and not in a pleasant way. The air inside the Panther is heavy, the combination of wool, leather, and engine heat building quickly. Movement feels restricted. Every bend of the elbow or twist at the waist has to be done with care to avoid smashing into someone or something. You adjust the headset one last time, pull your gloves tight, and settle into your seat. There's no ceremony to it. No one comments on the process, because they're all doing the same thing, each man sealing himself into his own layer of discomfort and protection. Once the hatches close, what you're wearing is all you'll have until the next stop. And you hope that stop isn't you clambering out under fire with seconds to spare. In here, the right clothes won't make you comfortable. They just make you slightly less likely to bleed, burn, or freeze before the day is over. You can't talk about life inside a Panther without talking about the men you're stuck in here with. The machine itself is just metal and mechanics. It's the crew that turns it from a stationary oven into something dangerous. But dangerous doesn't mean comfortable, coordinated, or even sane half the time. The truth is, the crew is your only lifeline, and your biggest source of irritation rolled into one cramped, diesel-scented package. 5 men make up the team. Each one has a job, a seat, and a way of doing things that doesn't change no matter how many times you tell them there's a better way. They're part soldier, part mechanic, part amateur contortionist. In theory, every man can fill in for someone else if needed. In practice, swapping positions in a live fight is like trying to trade seats in a moving car that's also on fire. The commander sits at the top of the hierarchy and literally at the top of the tank. His post is under the cupola, giving him the best view, if you can call peering through narrow periscopes a view. He's the eyes of the crew, the link to the outside world, and the man who decides whether you charge forward, reverse, or sit still and hope no one notices you. His headset is always on, listening to a constant stream of chatter from higher command and other tanks in the unit. Most of it is useless information or orders that will be obsolete in 5 minutes. He repeats the important bits into the intercom, usually in the clipped, rapid tone of someone who doesn't have the luxury of explaining. The rest of the time, he's swivelling in his seat, adjusting periscope angles, or ducking his head to shout something over the engine noise if the intercom fails, which it does regularly. A good commander keeps calm under pressure, sees threats before they see you, and doesn't waste your ammo on targets you can't kill. A bad one? He'll get you into situations where you're either bogged down in mud or staring at the side of a Sherman with no way to traverse fast enough. You can tell which type you've got within the first day. You can also tell how long he's been at this by the way he reacts to incoming fire. Veterans barely flinch. Rookies drop into their seat like someone just threw a live grenade in. The gunner sits just in front of the commander, his right eye glued to the TZF-12A sight, his hands on the traverse and elevation wheels. He's the trigger finger of the tank, and without him, you're just a steel box with an expensive decoration sticking out the front. The gunner lives in a constant state of half-readiness. Even when you're moving between positions, he's got one hand on the traverse controls, ready to swing the gun toward the commander's latest spotted target. His world is narrow, literally. He sees the outside through a small scope, and that's it. Situational awareness is second-hand, coming through the commander's voice in his ear. If the commander calls a target, the gunner finds it in the scope, lines it up, and waits for the green light to fire. Firing means the entire compartment shakes. A rush of heat smacks you in the face, and the gun's recoil slams backward before settling into place for the next round. The gunner doesn't look up to see the effect. That's the commander's job. His only concern is whether the next shell is in the breech. The loader has no such luxury of focus. Wedged on the left side of the turret, he's surrounded by racks of 70mm shells, each one weighing about 15 kilograms. His job is brutally simple. Grab the right type of shell, get it into the breech, lock it in, and get out of the way before the gun fires again. Repeat until your arms feel like they're coming out of their sockets. The loader has the least room of anyone in the turret. His knees are against the side of the gun, his elbows constantly banging against the turret wall or the ammo racks. When the gun fires, the breech block snaps back inches from his chest, and if he's not in the right spot, it'll hit him hard enough to send him home, if he's lucky. The heat in his corner builds fast, especially during rapid fire, and the cordite fumes seem to collect there first. Loaders have to know the ammo layout like their own pockets. You don't want to hand the gunner an armour-piercing round when he's trying to drop high explosive into a machine gun nest. The wrong shell means wasted time, wasted ammo, and sometimes a wasted opportunity to stay alive. The driver is down in the front left of the hull, behind the controls and vision slit. His seat is barely above the floor, and his world is the width of a narrow rectangle of armoured glass. Steering a Panther isn't like steering a car. You don't just turn a wheel, you wrestle two control levers, one for each track, using your body weight to coax the 45-ton machine into moving where you want it to go. The driver feels every bump in the terrain first. Mud, rocks, craters. They all come through the seat in spine-jarring detail. He's also responsible for managing the gearbox, which has a reputation for being both advanced and temperamental. Get the gear changes wrong, and you can stall the engine at the worst possible moment. Get them right, and the tank still jerks like a stubborn mule when you shift. Drivers don't get to look around much. The slit gives you a narrow view of what's directly ahead, and if the hatch is open for better visibility, you're risking your head to snipers. You rely on the commander's instructions for where to go, which means you're occasionally told to drive into what looks like, and often is, a death trap. The radio operator, bow machine gunner, sits next to the driver, handling both communication and the MG-34 mounted in the front plate. His headset connects him to the company net and to the other vehicles in your unit. He's the one who sends your requests for fuel, ammo, or evacuation, though whether those requests are answered depends entirely on what kind of day it is for higher command. When you're in combat, he's also the man keeping infantry from getting too close to your flanks. The bow MG has limited traverse, but it's enough to cut down anyone trying to sprint across your front. He has to swap between radio duties and firing in seconds, which is as chaotic as it sounds in a moving tank. The thing about crews is that personalities matter as much as skills. A crew that gets along can anticipate each other's movements, finish each other's sentences, and react to threats without half the commands needing to be spoken. A crew that doesn't get along will still fight, but they'll do it with short tempers, frayed patience, and the occasional elbow thrown harder than necessary. Everyone has habits that drive the others mad. The driver who rides the clutch too hard, making the gearbox whine. the loader who stashes cigarettes in the ammo racks, the commander who forgets that not everyone hears his muttered curses over the intercom. In the cramped space, there's no avoiding these quirks. You just live with them, because the alternative is trying to survive with fewer than 5 men, and that's a problem no one wants. The closeness also means you know more about each other than you ever wanted. Who snores, who talks in his sleep, who gets jittery when the shooting starts, who can go the longest without a proper meal. You notice when someone's quiet for too long, when their hands are shaking, or when they've been staring at the floor instead of their station. The tank doesn't give you much privacy, but it does give you a front row seat to how the war is wearing everyone down. Friendships form fast in this kind of environment, because they have to. You don't have the luxury of slow introductions or testing the waters. You're relying on the man next to you to do his job perfectly every time. The loader's got to trust the gunner not to fire while his arm is in the way. The driver's got to trust the commander not to steer him into a line of fire he can't escape. And everyone's got to trust the radio operator to call for help if it all goes wrong. Of course, trust doesn't mean there's no swearing, no shouting, and no arguments. There are plenty of those. Tempers flare when the heat inside the tank climbs past bearable, when the gearbox refuses to cooperate, or when someone botches a reload. You'll get yelled at, you'll yell back, and 10 minutes later you'll be sharing the last piece of bread in your kit because neither of you knows when you'll eat again. In the end, the crew isn't just a list of roles. It's a collection of personalities welded together by the shared reality that if one of you fails, all of you might not make it home. Out here in Normandy, with hedgerows hiding enemy guns and the air full of the sound of artillery, that's a bond no training manual can teach. You didn't choose each other, but once the hatches are closed and the Maybach's roaring, you're all each other's got. The inside of a Panther is not a room. It's not even a space in the way most people think about space. It's a hollow in a slab of armoured steel just big enough to fit 5 humans, several tons of ammunition, and all the machinery required to move, shoot, and breathe in short bursts between mechanical shudders. You don't walk inside it. You climb, twist, and wedge yourself into whatever spot your job dictates. Once you're in, that's where you stay until someone orders you out or something catastrophic forces the issue. There's no sense of privacy. You can't stretch your legs without kicking the driver in the ribs or knocking the loader's elbow mid-shell lift. The floor is layered with whatever the last week has given you. Crumbs of bread, shavings of metal from tools or the tracks, black streaks from oil, a few cigarette ends, maybe a dropped round from a machine gun belt that no one bothered to pick up. The smell doesn't fade. It's always there. Burnt fuel, grease, human sweat baked in the heat, cordite that seeped into every surface, and the faint must of wool uniforms that haven't been washed since you arrived in Normandy. The noise is constant. Even at idle, the Maybach HL 230 behind you is a low, vibrating growl that crawls up through your boots and into your spine. Once the driver pushes the throttle, the growl becomes a roar, drowning out any attempt at normal conversation. You don't talk in here, you shout, and even then you have to repeat yourself if the intercom is dead, which happens regularly, usually when you need it most. Then there's the gearbox. It's a complicated piece of engineering that on paper gives the Panther smooth gear changes and plenty of speed. In reality, every shift comes with a metallic clank followed by a lurch that throws the crew against whatever's closest. The driver wrestles with the levers like he's trying to tame something alive, and every time he wins, the rest of you get jerked forward or sideways. In rough terrain, and Normandy is nothing but rough terrain, the tank rocks and bounces hard enough to bruise ribs if you're not braced properly. The living space is also your working space, your dining area, and your sleeping quarters, which sounds almost domestic until you realise all those things happen with the engine rattling a few feet away and a main gun that can shatter your hearing in one shot. Every surface is hard, sharp, or both. There's no soft seat, just thin pads bolted to steel frames. The turret basket floor is grated metal. Drop something, and it either rattles loudly enough for everyone to notice, or disappears into the machinery entirely. You learn to navigate the space by touch as much as by sight. The lighting inside is poor, just a couple of dim bulbs, and whatever daylight filters through the periscopes or open hatches. When the hatches are closed, which is most of the time in combat zones, you live in a world of muted yellow light and shifting shadows. The commander's perch under the cupola has slightly better illumination, but the driver and radio operator sit in near darkness, their work lit only by instrument panel glow. Heat builds fast. The engine radiates warmth through the bulkhead, and the turret traps it. In summer, the temperature inside climbs until the air feels heavy, and you can feel sweat rolling down your back, even when you're sitting still. There's no breeze unless you risk opening a hatch, and that's only possible when the situation outside isn't actively trying to kill you. When you do open one, the blast of fresh air is brief and laced with the scent of smoke, churned mud, and the distant tang of cordite from other guns. Cold is no better. In bad weather, the steel hull turns into a refrigerator. The heat from the engine helps when you're moving, but the moment you stop, the chill creeps in. Your breath fogs in front of your face, and the condensation settles on every surface, making the walls damp and slick. That dampness works its way into your gloves, your boots, your socks. You can't get away from it, and you learn quickly that steel doesn't just conduct noise, it conducts the temperature straight into your bones. The engine has its own language, and you start to understand it after a while. A smooth, steady hum means the driver's found a good gear, and the terrain's not fighting back. A rising whine means he's pushing hard, maybe climbing or trying to get out of a boggy patch. A sudden drop into a rough, throaty growl means you're slowing down, either by choice or because something up ahead demands attention. Every change in tone sends a ripple through the crew. A glance between the commander and the gunner, a subtle shift from the loader as he checks his next round, the radio operator leaning toward his set in case the halt is about to become something worse. And then there's the vibration. It's not a gentle shake, it's a full body thrum that you stop noticing until you step out of the tank and realise your teeth aren't buzzing anymore. The floor vibrates under your boots. The seat vibrates under your thighs. The side of the turret hums against your shoulder if you lean on it. After hours inside, your muscles ache from the constant involuntary tension of bracing against it. The vibration gets into your hands from holding onto metal grips, and sometimes you can still feel it long after the engine's been shut off. Everything you do in this space is done in proximity to the others. The loader's knee bumps your hip when he shifts. The gunner's elbow brushes your shoulder as he cranks the traverse. The commander's boots are inches from the loader's head when he leans down to check something. You're in each other's way all the time, and there's no such thing as personal space. You don't even notice it after a while. Not because you've gotten used to it, but because there's no point thinking about a luxury you can't have. Living here means accepting that comfort doesn't exist. You're not going to stretch out, you're not going to relax in the way civilians think of it, and you're definitely not going to get peace and quiet. The Panther's living space is a compromise between function and survivability, and it sacrifices everything else to keep you inside and moving. Outside, the armour looks imposing, the lines sleek and powerful. Inside, it's a metal cage, where the engine roar and gearbox rattles are the heartbeat you can't escape. And the worst part? You know that this space, for all its discomforts, is also the safest place you can be when the shooting starts, which means you'll keep crawling back in, closing the hatch, and settling into the noise, the heat, and the rattling steel, because the alternative is being out there without it. And in Normandy, out there, has a way of ending the day faster than you'd like. The first thing you notice after a few hours inside a sealed Panther isn't the noise or the heat, it's the air, or what's left of it. The moment the hatches close, whatever atmosphere you had gets trapped, and the clock starts ticking. You and 4 other men are now sharing the same small pocket of oxygen, steadily replacing it with a stew of carbon dioxide, fuel vapour, sweat, and whatever unpleasant scents breakfast decided to leave behind. In theory, there's ventilation. The designers gave the Panther a fan system, a circular extractor mounted in the turret roof meant to pull out the smoke from firing, and the general build-up of fumes. In reality, it's about as effective as waving your hand at a house fire. The fan works when it feels like it, clunks loudly when it doesn't, and no one inside pretends it makes much difference. Most of the time, it just recirculates the same warm, stale air you've been breathing for hours. The real culprit is the Maybach HL230 a few feet away. Even with a bulkhead separating the fighting compartment from the engine bay, the smell of burnt petrol and hot oil seeps through every seam. It's not overpowering at first, but it's always there, an invisible fog that coats your mouth and throat. You feel it more than you smell it. That faint catch in the back of your nose, the heaviness in your chest when you take a deep breath. If you're the driver or radio operator, it's worse. It's down in the bow, the airflow is almost non-existent, and the engine heat creeps forward, baking the space until you can feel sweat gathering under your collar just from sitting still. Add in the main gun and things get worse fast. Every time the gunner fires, the breech cracks open to eject the spent casing, and a puff of cordite heavy smoke rolls into the turret. It's acrid, bitter, and impossible to avoid. The first shot stings your eyes and makes your throat itch. By the 5th, you're used to it in the same way you're used to being tired. Not because it's gone, but because you've stopped expecting relief. The loader gets the worst of it. He's right next to the breech, breathing in the fumes while wrestling the next shell into place. There's no such thing as fresh air unless the commander pops his hatch, and that's a calculated risk. Open it in the wrong place and you're inviting rifle fire, shrapnel, or a lucky shell fragment into the crew compartment. When it does open, the change is immediate. A cool draft sweeps through, bringing with it the smell of damp earth, hedgerow greenery, and the faint reek of burning somewhere far off. For a moment, you remember what unfiltered air tastes like. Then the hatch closes, and you're back to the Panther's private weather system. The smell of the crew blends into this mix. 5 men in wool uniforms, sweating under tension, moving in close quarters. It's not subtle. By midday, the air is thick enough that you can identify who's closest by scent alone. Leather gloves give off a sharp, oily tang, wool holds onto body odour like a sponge, and boots carry the stale damp of yesterday's mud. In the heat, it's oppressive. In the cold, it just clings, heavy and sour. Moisture builds up in ways you don't expect. The heat from the engine and human bodies pushes humidity up, and the cold steel walls pull it back down as condensation. Drops of water form on the inside surfaces, running down in thin, dirty lines that leave streaks on the paint. The periscope lenses fog over if the weather outside is cooler, and the gunner has to wipe them clear with a rag that's never truly clean. On bad days, you can taste the damp in the air, a metallic tang mixed with grease and exhaust. When the weather outside turns wet, the air gets heavier. Normandy mud clings to the tracks and hull, and every time the hatches open for loading or observation, the smell of it seeps in. It's not the clean scent of rain, it's the churned up stink of wet soil, trampled vegetation, and whatever's been rotting in the fields since the last bombardment. That smell doesn't leave, it just merges with the fuel, oil, and human sweat until it's one of the many background notes you stop noticing until you think about it. Ventilation isn't just about comfort, it's about staying alert. Stale fume-heavy air makes you sluggish. The first sign is the yawning. Then comes the dull ache behind your eyes, the faint throb in your temples. In training, they tell you to recognise the symptoms and open the hatches when it happens. In combat, you just push through it, because sticking your head out for a breath of air might be the last thing you do. Some crews improvise. They rig small canvas tubes to direct whatever breeze there is toward the driver's position. Others keep the turret fan running constantly, even though the noise adds to the already deafening background. A few will crack the loader's hatch for a minute at a time when the tank's in cover, letting a shaft of daylight and a thin ribbon of air snake in before snapping it shut again. It's never enough to truly clear the space, just enough to take the edge off before the air starts to turn again. By the end of a full day inside with the hatches sealed, the air is its own entity, warm, damp, and heavy with the collective output of 5 men, a roaring engine, and a gun that's been fired too many times. You step out into the open, and the first lungful of outside air feels cold and sharp, almost painful, like you've forgotten how to breathe properly. You notice the taste of grass, of rain, of smoke on the breeze, all the things the inside of the Panther flattens into the same dull, oily haze. And then you climb back in, pull the hatch shut, and settle into the stale warmth again. Because as bad as the air is in here, you know it's still safer than the alternative waiting just outside the armour. Driving a Panther isn't like driving anything else, and anyone who says it is has either never done it or is trying to sell you one. It's not a matter of turning a wheel and pressing pedals. It's a fight. You fight the weight, the terrain, the gearbox, the noise, and sometimes the rest of the crew when they yell at you for not defying the laws of physics. The driver's seat is less of a throne and more of a steel pit with a padded backrest bolted to it, wedged low in the hull's front left corner. The only thing between you and the outside world is a narrow vision slit about the width of your hand, reinforced with armoured glass that's already been chipped by debris. From this seat, the world is a rectangle. You don't see hedgerows, fields or villages. You see whatever fits inside that narrow frame, a patch of road the next curve in a dirt track, a splash of mud when a tank in front of you hits a puddle. If you want to look around, you don't turn your head. You shift your entire upper body toward one of the periscopes, or, if the situation allows, crack the hatch and stick your head out. That second option is the only way to truly see what's happening, but it also invites bullets, shrapnel, and very quick reminders of why the hatch was closed in the first place. The controls aren't forgiving. The Panther's steering system uses 2 long levers, one for each track. Pull the left lever, the left track slows and you turn left. Pull the right, you turn right. In theory, this is straightforward. In practice, every pull requires a deliberate heave of the arm and a feel for how much the ground is going to fight back. Mud sucks at the tracks, ruts jerk the tank in directions you didn't choose, and tree roots have a way of making one side lurch up without warning. Your boots rest on pedals that are stiff enough to make your calves ache after an hour. Gear changes require a practiced rhythm. Clutch in, lever to neutral. Find the next gear without grinding. Clutch out, throttle just enough to keep the revs happy. Miss the timing and the Panther lurches, stalls or howls through the gearbox in a way that makes the rest of the crew swear at you. Normandy doesn't make it easy. The fields look open on a map, but in reality they're cut into irregular patches by hedgerows. Thick, ancient walls of earth and vegetation that can stop a smaller vehicle cold. You approach them at an angle, hoping the front plate rides up and over without digging the nose in. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you just bog down, the track spinning and spraying clods of dirt, while the commander's voice comes sharp over the intercom, telling you to back out and try again. Backing out means craning your neck toward the tiny mirror, or relying entirely on the commander's calls, because your own view is now a wall of green branches and dirt. Speed isn't your friend here. The Panther can move quickly on a road, close to 50 km/h if you really open it up. But in the bocage, speed means hitting unseen holes that jolt everyone in the crew and threaten to throw the track. You learn to keep it steady, coaxing the tank forward rather than forcing it. Every kilometre feels longer than it is. Your hands ache from gripping the levers. Your left leg burns from the clutch, and your back stiffens from absorbing every jolt through the seat. The noise is relentless. The Maybach's roar fills the compartment, vibrating through the pedals into your legs and up your spine. You can't talk to anyone without the intercom, and even then voices come through with a constant hiss of static under them. The gearbox adds its own soundtrack, a mix of grinding, whining, and occasional metallic bangs when the shift isn't perfect. From the driver's position, you hear every change in tone, every sign that the tank's mood has shifted. A smooth hum is good. A high-pitched whine means you're working too hard in the wrong gear. A sudden drop to a deep, uneven growl means the tracks are bogging down or the ground is fighting you. Driving also means you're the first to know when something's gone wrong mechanically. A loss of power, a change in vibration, a sudden stiffness in the steering. You feel it before the others do. Sometimes it's nothing, just mud packed into the track links or a branch caught under a fender. Sometimes it's the start of a breakdown, and you know you'll be climbing out with tools in hand, while everyone else looks over the side offering helpful comments. There's a constant balance between protecting the tank and protecting the crew. You want to avoid exposing the thinner side armour to enemy fire, which means lining up your turns so the glacis faces the threat. You want to keep the ride steady enough for the gunner to track targets, which means easing into rough ground instead of hammering through it. But you also want to get where you're going before someone else's gun sights find you. Every choice is a compromise, and every compromise gets judged by 4 other people whose safety depends on you. Long drives are the worst. The heat from the engine creeps forward, turning your corner of the hull into a sauna. Your uniform sticks to your back. Your gloves grow damp, and the inside of your helmet padding feels like a sponge. You shift in the seat, trying to find a position that doesn't make your lower spine feel like it's being compacted. Outside, the scenery changes in slow, jerky increments through the vision slit. More hedgerows, more fields, the occasional flash of a ruined farmhouse. When the commander calls for a halt, you pull the levers, brake, and let the gearbox settle into neutral. For a moment the engine drops to a calmer rumble, and you can feel the muscles in your arms and legs relax, but you don't switch off. You keep your hands near the controls, eyes on that narrow view, waiting for the next order. Sometimes it comes in seconds, sometimes in minutes. Either way, the moment of rest is never long enough to make the seat feel less like a steel box lined with fatigue. Driving a Panther is equal parts skill, endurance and nerve. You're not just steering a vehicle, you're carrying a gun platform, 4 other men, and enough ammunition to light up a small village. You're threading all of that through terrain designed by nature to trap you, while somewhere out there, someone's already aiming at you. And when the order comes to move again, you grip the levers, ease the clutch, and feel the whole machine surge forward, the roar filling your ears and the vision slit framing another patch of Normandy you'll have to force your way through. The gunner's world inside a Panther is small, smaller than most people can imagine. From the outside, the long 70-50mm KWK 42 gun looks like it can see forever, but from the gunner's seat, the world shrinks to a narrow circle of glass and crosshairs. You don't look around in here, you look through. Everything else is background noise. The seat is fixed to the right of the main gun, a padded metal pan with just enough room to plant yourself and no room to stretch. Your knees are bent, your back is hunched, and your right shoulder is practically married to the traverse wheel. Your left hand hovers over the elevation wheel, fingertips blackened from constant contact with greased metal. Every movement is small and deliberate, a tiny twist to the right, a careful crank upward. You don't yank or jerk, unless you want the commander swearing in your ear for losing a target. Your eyes are glued to the TZF-12A sight, a piece of precision glass in a cast metal housing that's both your lifeline and your prison. There's no colour in this view, no wide-angle panorama. You see a magnified image framed by darkness, the crosshairs bisecting it like a sniper's scope. The glass isn't perfect, smudges from fingerprints or oil leave faint halos in the light, and dust clings to the inside no matter how often you wipe it. When the sun's in the wrong place, glare can blind you, and you're left shifting your head to try to cut it down. Targets don't appear out of nowhere. The commander's voice comes first, a short, urgent burst over the intercom. "Sherman, 2 o'clock, 800 metres. Your hands react before your brain finishes processing. Traverse wheel to the right, smooth but fast, feeling the gun swing across its arc. The loader's already reaching for the right shell, usually armour-piercing unless told otherwise. Through the sight, the hedgerows blur by until something metallic fills the circle. You fine-tune the traverse, adjust the elevation, and settle the crosshairs over a patch of armour that looks vulnerable. The gun's optics are good, far better than what most of the allies are using, but they're still only as effective as your range guess. The commander calls the distance, you set it into the sight, and you hope it's right. Too short, and the round buries itself in a ditch. Too long, and it sails over the target. You've got seconds to line it up before the Sherman's gunner is doing the same to you. When the shot comes, it's not subtle. The gun bucks, the breech slams backward with a sharp metallic clang, and a shockwave of sound and heat slaps your face. Through the sight, the target jerks, smokes, or bursts if you've hit right. Sometimes there's no visible effect, and that's when the commander's voice is back in your ear, telling you to adjust and fire again. Reloading isn't your job, but you're part of the rhythm. As soon as the shot's away, you're cranking the traverse or elevation to track the target's movement, while the loader slams the next shell into the breech. You feel him moving beside you, hear the heavy metallic thunk of the casing locking in, and you're already back on the trigger. There's no pause, no break to admire your work. In a fight, you can go from one target to the next without lifting your eye from the scope. The gunner's world is also a guessing game. Not every target is a tank. Sometimes it's an anti-tank gun hidden behind foliage, a flash in the tree line, or a shape that might be a machine gun nest. You get a quick description from the commander. 3 o'clock, low in the brush, and you're swinging the gun, squinting through the sight to find something that doesn't belong in the landscape. It's not always obvious. The ground in Normandy is full of false shapes. Hedgerows that look like cover, but hide nothing. Shadows that suggest a gun barrel. A glint of sunlight on wet leaves that could be glass or could be nothing. All the while, the tank is moving. The driver's trying to keep the ride steady, but every rut and bump jolts your aim. You compensate, hand spinning the wheels in small, constant corrections, trying to keep the sight picture still enough to make the shot count. A moving target makes it worse. You're leading it, adjusting for speed, hoping your mental math is better than theirs. The biggest frustration is when the target disappears. Smoke from your own gun, dust kicked up by the tracks, or a shell hit nearby can cloud the sight completely. You sit there, peering into a white or brown blur, waiting for it to clear enough to see again. The commander might give you new orders before it does, forcing you to swing onto something else. When you're not actively firing, you're scanning. The commander's looking too, but you're the one who has to make the shot the moment he calls it. Your eyes ache from staring through the scope for too long, your neck stiff from holding your head in the same position. The rest of the crew moves and talks around you, but it's background noise. You're locked into that small circle of glass, waiting for the next shape to enter and for your hands to bring the crosshairs over it. The gunner's view is all pressure. There's no margin for error, no luxury of time. A missed shot means the loader works harder, the commander shouts louder, and the enemy gets closer. You live in a world measured in meters and seconds, steel and smoke, where the only horizon you see is the one inside your sight. And when the day is over, your eyes still feel the ghost of those crosshairs, drifting over every shadow, every tree line, every moving shape. Because in the Panther, you don't just see through the gun, you start to think through it. Reloading under fire in a Panther isn't just about speed, it's about survival. And the loader knows it better than anyone else in the crew. His job is simple in theory. Get the right shell into the breech as fast as humanly possible, so the gunner can fire again before whatever's out there fires back. In practice, it's like trying to load a cannon in a closet that's being shaken by an earthquake, while someone sets off fireworks in your face. The loader's position is the smallest and most chaotic corner of the turret, tucked to the left of the main gun and surrounded by ammunition racks. Those racks are both your best friend and your biggest hazard. They're stacked with 7mm rounds, tall, heavy, and awkward to manoeuvre in tight quarters. Each shell weighs roughly as much as a small child and is topped with either a blunt steel armour-piercing cap or a more rounded high-explosive head. The racks are arranged for maximum storage, not easy access, so you're constantly twisting, crouching, or reaching over gear to get at the next round. When the commander calls out a target, you don't wait to be told what to load. You already know from the threat. A Sherman or Churchill gets PZGR 39 armour-piercing. Infantry or an anti-tank gun might get SPAR GR 34 high-explosive. You have to be right the first time. Handing the gunner the wrong shell isn't just embarrassing. It wastes precious seconds and could cost the crew the fight. That's why every loader knows the layout of his racks by heart, down to the last round, and keeps a running tally in his head as the battle goes on. The moment the gunner fires, the breech block slams back toward you with a metallic crack. The empty casing clatters out, still hot enough to burn through wool if it touches you. You use one hand to shove it down into the spent shell bin, the other already reaching for the next round. The space is so tight that you have to angle the shell just right to clear the turret wall, the gun mount, and the breech itself. Your elbows and knuckles are always collecting fresh scrapes from steel edges. All of this is happening while the tank itself is moving. The driver is pushing over rough ground, the suspension is bouncing, and every bump threatens to throw you off balance. You brace with your legs, leaning into the motion, keeping the shell cradled against your body so you don't drop it. Dropping a live round isn't just noisy, it's dangerous. The rounds are designed to withstand rough handling, but no one in the turret wants to test how much abuse they can really take. Incoming fire makes everything worse. When an enemy shell hits nearby, the whole tank jolts. Sometimes it's just a shudder, other times it's a hard slam that rattles your teeth and makes your ears ring. You don't get to stop and check, you just keep loading. Dust and smoke might pour in through the open commander's hatch, mixing with the cordite haze from your own gun. Your lungs burn, your eyes water, but your hands don't stop moving. The gunner's waiting, and seconds feel like minutes when he's lined up on a target but can't fire. You slide the shell into the breech, shove it home until the locking mechanism clicks, and shout "loaded!" or just slap the back of the gunner's arm if the intercom's dead. He fires, and the whole cycle starts again. In a prolonged fight, you can find yourself doing this dozens of times in a row, your muscles burning from the weight and repetition. Communication is constant. The commander might call for a switch in ammo type mid-fight, forcing you to dig for a different shell in the middle of your rhythm. You twist, grab it, and adjust without missing a beat. The loader's compartment isn't organised for comfort, it's organised for capacity. So getting to the back racks means contorting yourself into shapes you didn't know you could make while the turret swings above you. Your hands never stay clean. Even if the shells start shiny and polished, the casings pick up grime from the racks, grease from the gun, and soot from repeated firing. By the third or fourth reload, your gloves are blackened, the leather slick from sweat. If you lose your grip, the shell's weight can slam your hand into the breech guard or crush your fingers against the steel. Everyone in the role has scars to prove it. When the fight pauses, you don't relax. You check your racks, note what's left, and rearrange so the most likely rounds are in the easiest reach. You know that at any second the commander might call another target, and you'll need to start the whole dance again. In those brief moments, you wipe sweat from your face with your sleeve, suck in the warm, heavy air, and wait for the next order. Reloading under fire isn't about brute strength alone. It's about never losing the rhythm, no matter what's happening outside. You work in a loop. Shell, load, clear, ready. Over and over, as long as the gunner's firing and the commander's calling targets. You can't afford to fall behind, because in a Panther, the gun is your main weapon, and if it's silent for too long, the next sound you hear might be the one that ends the fight. The Panther is a marvel of German engineering on paper, a blend of heavy armour, high-velocity firepower, and mobility that, in theory, makes it one of the most formidable tanks of the war. In reality, the paper never has to climb a muddy Norman slope, never has to dodge a strafing typhoon, and never has to live with the daily grind of keeping 45 tons of steel running in battlefield conditions. On the field, the Panther is like a temperamental thoroughbred, fast, powerful, beautiful in motion, but always one bad step away from collapsing in a heap and throwing everyone on its back into the dirt. You learn this the first time you have to make a quick move, and instead end up parked in a hedgerow with smoke curling out of the engine bay. The Maybach HL230 P30 engine is a masterpiece in a workshop, but it's also a high-strung, fuel-hungry beast. It needs careful handling, and careful handling is hard to do when the commander's shouting at you to close the gap or reverse out of an ambush. Push it too hard, and it overheats. Nurse it too much, and you're crawling forward at a walking pace while enemy gunners dial you in. The gearbox, the ZF AK7-200, is another point of pride on the blueprint and a point of pain everywhere else. It's advanced for its time, with 7 forward gears, but the precision machining that makes it smooth on the test track turns it into a liability in real terrain. The shift linkage feels solid right up until it doesn't, and then you're fighting to find a gear while the rest of the crew bounces around, wondering why you've stopped moving. Grind it too often and the teeth start to chip. Lose a gear entirely and your day's mobility plan just shrank to straight ahead or nothing. Breakdowns aren't a question of if, but when. The Panther's suspension, those interleaved road wheels that look so elegant in photographs, loves to pack itself with Normandy's thick clay mud. Once it dries, it hardens like cement, forcing you to dig it out with whatever tools you can find. In winter, or during wet weather, the mud doesn't even wait to dry. It just freezes solid overnight, locking the wheels in place until you spend an hour chipping at them in the cold. And if a road wheel cracks, you're not swapping it out in 5 minutes like on a car. It's a chain of heavy steel parts that have to come off in a specific order, each one a 2-man lift at minimum. Tracks are another Achilles heel. They're strong, yes, but they're also heavy and under massive strain every time you make a sharp turn or hit rough ground. Throw a track and you're instantly immobile, a sitting target in the middle of whatever open patch you are crossing. Fixing it means hauling out the track jack, wrestling the links back into place, and manhandling the pins while the rest of the crew stands guard with small arms. If you're unlucky, you're doing this under fire, lying in mud or dust, and praying the next shell aimed your way misses. Then there's the fuel situation. The Panther drinks petrol like a man dying of thirst gulps water. On a good day, with no combat manoeuvring, you might get 200 kilometres out of a full load. In combat, with all the idling short bursts of speed and repositioning, you burn through fuel so fast that resupply becomes a constant headache. If the trucks can't reach you because the roads are cut or under fire, you start rationing movement, which is a polite way of saying you sit in one spot and hope the war moves in your favour. Even when nothing's broken, there's always something to check, adjust, or coax back into cooperation. Cooling fans need belts tightened, radiators clog with debris. Oil pressure dips and spikes for reasons you can't immediately diagnose. The electrical system occasionally decides it's had enough, killing your turret traverse motor until someone crawls in with a multimeter or a length of spare wire to jerry-rig a fix. And the more miles you put on a Panther, the more these little issues start to stack up into something that keeps you out of action entirely. The maintenance schedule, if you could follow it in combat, would eat most of your daylight hours. But you can't. You do what you can in the lulls. Grease the fittings, top up fluids, knock mud off the running gear, check for loose bolts, and replace whatever small parts you actually have in your spares kit. Anything bigger, like a transmission swap, means getting the tank back to a field workshop, if you can tow it that far without losing another one along the way. And when the Panther decides it's done for the day, there's no negotiating. It might be a snapped torsion bar that leaves you listing to one side, or a fuel pump that refuses to feed the engine no matter how many times you cycle it. You sit there listening to the Maybach turn over without catching, or you feel the whole machine shudder to a stop in the middle of a field, and you know you're about to have a very long walk back to friendly lines if recovery can't reach you. The cruel part is that when it works beautifully. The gun punches through enemy armour at ranges the Shermans can't match. The armour shrugs off most frontal hits, and the suspension, when not jammed with half of France's soil, rides smoother than you would expect from something this heavy. That taste of superiority makes the failures sting even more. Every time you're sidelined by a mechanical issue, you're reminded that in Normandy, the battle isn't just against the Allies, it's against your own machine. For the crew, reliability is less about faith in the tank and more about faith in each other. When the Panther starts acting up, it's the driver's feel for the controls, the commander's judgment on whether to push or pull back, and everyone's willingness to climb out and get filthy that keeps you in the fight. The manuals may call it preventive maintenance. The crew just calls it keeping the damn thing alive long enough to see tomorrow. Because here's the truth no one in the propaganda posters talks about. The Panther's greatest weapon is also its biggest liability. It can kill almost anything it can see, but it can also kill its own chances just by throwing a track or boiling over its coolant at the wrong time. And in Normandy, wrong times are everywhere. Enemy contact in a Panther starts the same way every time, with sound. You almost never see them first. The first warning might be the flat, heavy crump of a shell landing somewhere nearby, close enough to make the armour ring. Or it's the sharp, fast crack of an armour-piercing round glancing off the glacis plate. Sometimes it's quieter but more dangerous. The muffled chatter of an enormous 50 cal somewhere ahead, walking fire across the hedgerows toward your position. Whatever it is, the commander's voice snaps over the intercom almost instantly, and the air inside the tank changes. Up to that moment, the Maybach engines roar and the metallic rattle of the tracks were the main soundtrack. Now, every sound outside is a possible threat. The gunner tightens his grip on the traverse and elevation wheels. The loader's hand goes to the nearest shell, and the driver's eyes fix on that narrow slit of armoured glass, as if staring hard enough will reveal what's out there. The radio operator leans into his headset, filtering through static for a fragment of information from the net. A call for fire, a contact report, maybe a warning that someone's already been hit. When the commander calls a target, Sherman, 1 o'clock 700 metres, the whole crew shifts into a single moving part. The driver adjusts the tank's angle to keep the thickest armour facing the threat, even if it means grinding through a ditch or knocking over a fence. The gunner swings the turret, the heavy gears whining as the 75 mm swings onto line. The loader grabs the right shell without asking, usually PAS-YR 39 armour-piercing, and cradles it against his chest, already feeling the heat building in the turret from the previous shot. The moment the target's in the gunner's sight, the turret steadies. The commander gives the order, and the gunner squeezes the trigger. Inside, the breech slams back with a sound that's half explosion, half machinery. Cordite smoke punches into the air, hot enough to sting your nose and make your eyes water. The recoil rocks the whole tank, and in the narrow field of the sight, the gunner catches just a split second of the round's impact. A flash, a puff of black smoke, or sometimes nothing at all. If the target's still moving, the call comes again. Hit it again! And the loader's already slamming the next round into the breech. The gunner makes a micro adjustment, the crosshairs settle, and the cycle repeats. Each shot is loud enough to make your ribs feel it, the vibration rolling through the steel into your bones. Sometimes you don't get the luxury of a deliberate duel. You round a hedgerow, and there's a towed anti-tank gun dead ahead, already swinging its barrel toward you. In those moments, the Panther's armour is both comfort and curse. Comfort, because it might take a hit. Curse, because the crew inside still feels every impact like a fist to the chest. The driver throws the tank into gear, the gunner snaps the turret around, and the loader moves like he's running on pure reflex. It's seconds, maybe less, between seeing the threat and trying to kill it before it kills you. Incoming fire doesn't always hit, but when it does, the sound is unmistakable. A sharp, metallic clang if it bounces, a deafening, body-shaking whump if it punches through something on the exterior. A deflected round might shower the inside with spall, razor-edged fragments of steel sheared from the armour's interior surface. They tear through whatever they meet, wiring, optics, flesh. Crews learn quickly to keep the spall liners in place and to duck instinctively when the hit sounds close. The most dangerous contact is from above. Normandy's skies are often full of Allied fighter bombers, and the scream of a typhoon's engine is a sound that makes every crew instinctively look for cover. If you're caught in the open, the only real option is to throw the tank into gear and pray the trees or buildings nearby break the pilot's line of sight before the rockets hit. The commander might shout directions to get under cover. The driver just pushes the Panther as fast as the ground will let it go, tracks chewing mud and dirt into the air. Infantry contact has its own rhythm. The radio operator's ball machine gun might open up first, cutting down anyone too close to the front. The commander might call for a high explosive round into a suspected position, turning a section of hedgerow into a wall of dirt and splinters. The danger here is that infantry with the right weapon, a Piat, a bazooka, can knock out even a Panther if they get close enough to hit the weaker side or rear armour. That's why every man inside is listening for the telltale whoosh of a rocket and the solid thump of it hitting home. When enemy contact stretches out into a sustained fight, the turret becomes a world of constant motion. The gun swinging, the loader feeding shell after shell, the commander calling ranges and spotting impacts, the driver shifting the hull to keep the best angle. The air thickens with smoke, sweat and heat until breathing feels like work. The noise is relentless. Engine roaring, gears clanking, shells slamming into the breech, and the constant background percussion of small arms, fire pinging off the hull. Then, sometimes as quickly as it started, it over. The target burns, flees, or disappears into cover, and the commander orders a new heading. The adrenaline drains as fast as it came, leaving you with trembling hands, sweat running down your face, and the ringing echo of gunfire still in your ears. You take a breath, shallow, because the air is warm and stale, and start checking your station for damage, knowing the next call of contact could come at any second. In a Panther, enemy contact isn't an event. It's a constant possibility, a shadow that's always there at the edge of the vision slit or the scope. And when it comes, you either kill what's out there, or you give it the chance to kill you. There's no third option. The Panther doesn't have a bathroom. That's not an oversight, that's just reality. The people who designed it weren't thinking about comfort breaks. They were thinking about armour thickness, gun penetration, and engine power. Bodily functions didn't make the blueprint, so bathroom inside a Panther means whatever you can make work without leaving the tank and without getting in the way of loading the next shell. When you're sealed up in combat, you can't just hop out for a quick visit to the hedgerow. Every hatch you open is a potential invitation for a bullet, shell fragment, or worse, which means if you've been in the tank for hours, and you will be, you have to find a way to deal with the problem right there. For most crews, that means a ration tin, an empty shell casing, or whatever container you can improvise. Nobody likes it, but nobody has the luxury of pretending it won't happen. Urine is the easy part. A cut-down fuel can, a steel mess tin, or even the old standby, leaning toward a corner when you're not on direct duty, works in a pinch. The loader's position often becomes the designated facilities, because he's already half standing most of the time, but that's only if you can time it between reloads and shifts of the turret. Once you've used whatever container's handy, you slap a lid on it, or set it somewhere out of the way, which usually means tucking it into a floor recess next to the transmission or behind an ammo rack. It will ride there until the next safe stop, and yes, it will slosh with every bump in the terrain. Solid waste is the nightmare scenario. If you know you're going to be in the tank all day, you adjust your eating in the morning to avoid it. But sometimes nature doesn't care about the tactical situation. That's when someone digs out the emergency tin. Usually an old ration container with a lid, sometimes lined with whatever scrap paper or rag you can spare. Privacy doesn't exist. You do your best to turn away, the others pretend they're busy, and the smell instantly becomes part of the air everyone has to breathe. If you're in combat when this happens, you'll have to keep going through the motions, literally loading, firing or driving, while someone is dealing with their business 2 feet away. Hygiene afterward is basic. There's no running water, no soap dispenser. You wipe with whatever's available, a scrap of rag, a bit of newspaper, or a handful of straw if you happen to have any, for bedding in the supply stowage. If you're lucky, you've got a small stash of actual toilet paper in your personal kit, but it's too valuable to waste unless you have to. Washing your hands means a splash from your canteen, which you are saving for drinking. More often than not, you just rub your palms on your trousers or gloves and get back to work. When you're not in combat and the area is safe, you can climb out and pick a patch of ground like any other soldier. But the Panther changes even that. If you're halted in a field, you don't wander far, partly because you might have to scramble back in at any moment, and partly because there's always the chance of snipers watching. You stick close, do what you need to do, and hope no one calls "mount up" before you're finished. In the mud and rain, it's even worse. Slippery boots, wet gear, and the smell of the tank mixing with whatever you're doing. The other problem is timing. In combat, you can't just stop because you need a bathroom. The driver can't leave his seat, the gunner can't pull away from the scope, and the commander's eyes are always on the surroundings. That means everyone ends up holding it longer than is healthy, which makes the eventual break a mad scramble and a grim relief. In some prolonged fights, there's no break at all. You just deal with it later, after the shooting stops. Or not at all, if you're unlucky. It's one of those subjects no one talks about in the after-action reports. You'll hear about the kill counts, the distances, the manoeuvres. You won't hear about the shell casing half full of stale urine rolling under the turret floor, or the ration tin in the corner that everyone's pretending doesn't exist. But if you've been in a Panther for more than half a day, you know, bathroom is whatever you can make work in the moment. And dignity isn't part of the equation. And when you finally do get a proper break, climbing out, stretching your legs, finding a quiet corner of a ruined building or a ditch, it feels like the most luxurious part of the day. Not because it's pleasant, but because it means you're outside the steel box, breathing real air, and no one's firing at you for the few minutes it takes. Then you climb back in, close the hatch, and remember that next time it'll probably be the tin again. Meals in a Panther aren't meals the way civilians think of them. There's no table, no plates, no steam rising from something freshly cooked. Food inside the tank is whatever you can get into your mouth without dropping it into the machinery or onto the floor. And hot usually means it was near the engine compartment long enough to pick up some warmth. You eat when you can, not when you want to, and the definition of when you can changes with every mile and every burst of gunfire. Most crews live on a mix of German field rations and whatever they can scrounge. The official Panzer rations include tinned meat, hard biscuits, bread if the supply line is holding, and sometimes a precious can of condensed milk or jam. These tins are squat, heavy, and sealed like they were designed to survive artillery fire, which means opening them inside the cramped turret requires a can opener, a knife, or just brute force against a steel edge. That's a delicate game in a moving vehicle. One slip and you've stabbed your own hand or sent meat juice flying into the optics. Fresh food is rare. If you're lucky, you get a loaf of bread from the supply truck before it goes stale, or a hunk of sausage traded from an infantry unit. Sometimes the crew pools coins or cigarettes to buy eggs or vegetables from a local farmer. though in Normandy most of the civilians are either gone or keeping their distance. Anything perishable has to be eaten fast. The inside of a panther, with its engine heat and stale air, is a terrible refrigerator. There's no real cooking, but there is improvisation. Some crews wedge tins between warm engine parts to heat them slightly while on the move, creating a makeshift tank oven. Others keep a small solid fuel stove stowed for use when they're halted in a safe spot. But safe spot is relative, and firing up a stove means opening hatches, which in combat zones is always a risk. More often, you just eat cold tinned beef, cold bread, cold coffee if you're out of fuel tablets to heat it. Coffee is a prized commodity, even if it's ersatz. It's brewed in mess tins or enamel mugs, sometimes using water from a canteen, sometimes from whatever source is nearby. You learn quickly that boiling water is a luxury. Most of the time, you just stir the grounds into lukewarm water and hope it wakes you up enough to keep going. Sugar, if you have it, is hoarded like treasure. Milk is almost unheard of unless someone's found a cow and taken the risk of milking it. Eating in motion is an exercise in balance. The panther jolts and sways, and anything not clamped in your teeth or firmly in your hand risks hitting the floor, where it's instantly coated in oil, dust, and whatever else lives down there. You end up eating one-handed, the other gripping a handle or brace to keep yourself steady. The loader might take bites between shells, the driver between gear shifts, the gunner between sightings. The commander eats in the pauses between shouting orders and scanning the horizon. Sometimes the timing's terrible. You open a tin, take one bite, and the commander calls out a target. The half-eaten meal goes somewhere, jammed behind a brace, stuffed into a jacket pocket, and might not be touched again for hours. By the time you get back to it, it's congealed, stale, and probably has a layer of dust on it, but you eat it anyway because you don't know when the next chance will come. Shared meals happen when the tank is halted for the night or during a longer lull. The crew will gather what they have, spread it out on whatever flat surface is available, often the engine deck outside, and divide it as evenly as possible. Someone might slice sausage with a bayonet, someone else tear bread by hand. The conversation is sparse. Everyone's too busy eating before orders come to move again. If there's hot food from a field kitchen nearby, that's a small miracle, but you can't count on it. There's no escaping the smells. Food mixes with the ever-present stench of fuel, oil, and men who haven't had a proper wash in days. Eating tinned pork while breathing exhaust fumes is something you get used to, or you go hungry. The inside of the panther traps those smells, so even after the food's gone, the air carries a faint echo of whatever was eaten. Sausage, bread, strong coffee, or tinned fish if someone was unlucky enough to bring it aboard. At the end of the day, meals on the move are about keeping your body going, not about pleasure. You eat to stay functional, to keep your hands steady, and your mind sharp enough to react when the next contact call comes. You don't savour, you consume. And when you climb out at night and stretch your legs, that first mouthful of outside air, unflavoured by oil and cordite, almost feels like a meal in itself. Then you check your kit, climb back into the steel box, and start thinking about when you'll get the next chance to eat, knowing it will probably be cold, quick, and interrupted. Sleep inside a panther isn't really sleep. It's more like slipping into short, uneven patches of unconsciousness whenever the chance appears. knowing that at any second you could be woken by the commander's voice, the clank of a hatch, or the sound of something hitting the armour from the outside. You don't get 8 hours. You don't even get 4 hours in a row. You get whatever's left over after driving, loading, shooting, repairing, eating, and standing watch. The crew doesn't all sleep at once. At least one man is always awake, usually 2. The commander sets a rotation so someone's keeping an eye or an ear on the outside. If you're not on watch, you find a spot and try to get comfortable. Comfortable in a Panther means picking the least painful arrangement of limbs in a steel compartment full of protruding bolts, sharp edges, and machinery that's always in the way. The driver and radio operator sometimes nod off right in their seats, helmets still on, arms folded across their chests. It's not restful. The seat backs are short, the padding is thin, and every vibration from the idling Maybach engine hums through your spine. The gunner leans against the breech guard or props himself up in the corner of the turret, knees pulled in. The loader, with no real seat of his own, usually ends up wedged between the turret wall and the ammo racks, helmet tipped forward, chin resting on his chest. The commander can stretch out a little if he's willing to rest in the cupola, but that means sleeping with his head a few inches from the hatch and waking every time it rattles. The noise never fully stops. Even with the engine off, there's the creak of cooling metal, the faint ticking of contracting parts, and the occasional thud from outside. A boot on the hull, a branch brushing past, sometimes distant gunfire. If the engine's running, forget it. The constant low-frequency rumble becomes part of your body, vibrating in your ribs and skull until you start dreaming about it. The air isn't friendly to sleep either. In a closed-up Panther, the temperature swings wildly depending on the weather outside and whether the engine's been running. In summer, it's stifling, the kind of heat where sweat beads on your face before you even close your eyes. In winter, the cold metal leaches warmth from your body no matter how many layers you're wearing. If the hatches are closed, the air is always stale, heavy with the smell of fuel, oil, and 5 men who've been living in the same cramped space all day. You keep your boots on, always. You might loosen your belt or jacket if it's safe, but you don't undress. You don't have a pillow. Maybe you ward up your jacket or use your pack, but most of the time it's just your helmet between your head and the nearest solid surface. If you're outside a tank, you might lie on the engine deck, using the warmth of the metal to take the chill off, but that's only if you're sure no one's shooting. Sleep is shallow. The slightest noise, a gear shifting, a hatch squealing, a voice on the radio yanks you back awake. You don't wake refreshed, you wake disoriented, your neck stiff, your mouth dry. You might have been asleep for 20 minutes, or maybe an hour, but your body doesn't care. It still wants more, and you still have to get back to work. Sometimes you get lucky and catch a stretch of relative quiet. The crew might all get an hour or 2 drifting off in awkward positions while the Panther sits in a tree line or behind a building. Those are the moments when exhaustion wins completely. You can fall asleep with your hands still on the traverse wheel, with a half-eaten ration in your lap, or mid-sentence in a conversation. The body takes whatever it can get. Dreams are strange inside a tank. The constant vibration and the way the sound changes as you breathe make it hard to tell where sleep ends and waking begins. You might dream you're still moving through the bocage, the sound of the engine in your ears, only to wake and realise it's real. The driver has fired up the Maybach and you're already rolling. Sometimes you dream about open space, lying in grass, walking through a field, breathing clean air. Those dreams are almost worse, because waking up means remembering you're still inside a steel box. The worst is when you wake to the sound of incoming fire. There's no gentle return to awareness, just the jolt of adrenaline as you're yanked upright, trying to remember where you are and what's happening. Your body might be screaming for more sleep, but your hands are already moving to your station. Whatever aches you had from your awkward sleeping position are pushed aside by the immediate need to survive. Over time, you stop thinking of sleep as something that happens at night. It's just something that happens in fragments whenever it's possible. 5 minutes leaning against the turret wall during a lull. 10 minutes with your back to the gearbox while the commander talks to HQ on the radio. 20 minutes on the engine deck in the fading light, one eye half open in case you have to scramble back inside. And when you do get a proper stretch, rare, but it happens, you almost don't trust it. You lie there in your corner of the tank, helmet off, eyes closed, listening for the noise that will signal the end of it. Because you know it's coming. In a Panther, sleep is never permanent. It's just another pause between the moments that keep you awake. Weather inside a Panther doesn't care about the forecast. It makes its own. Whatever's happening outside, the tank takes it, traps it, and then cooks it into something far less pleasant. You're not protected from the elements so much as you're sealed in with them, and once the hatches are shut, the outside climate mixes with the engine heat, the crew's body heat, and the smell of everything you've been carrying since the last time you opened up. In summer, the heat is the first thing you notice, or rather, it's the first thing you can't escape. The Maybach engine sits just behind the fighting compartment, and every time it runs, it radiates warmth forward like a steel furnace. That warmth doesn't dissipate. It builds, settling into the turret walls, the floor plates, even the breech of the main gun. By midday, the inside air is thick and heavy, sticking to your skin. Sweat drips down your back, soaks your shirt, and makes your helmet pads feel like damp rags. You can wipe your forehead, but it's back in seconds. You don't open the hatches unless you have to. Open hatches are invitations for snipers, shrapnel, and every flying insect in Normandy. So you sit in it, breathing air that has been exhaled and reheated a dozen times already, tasting the faint tang of cordite if you've been firing recently. In those moments, you'd swear the air is thicker than it should be, like it's holding you down. Winter doesn't make things better. With the engine off, the steel hull loses heat fast. Cold creeps in from every angle, through the floor plates into your boots, through the turret ring into your back, through the hatch seams into your fingers. Even with gloves on, you feel it biting at the skin. Your breath clouds in front of you, but it doesn't hang long before vanishing into the chill. When you do run the engine for warmth, it's a temporary fix. The heat comes unevenly. Your back might be warm while your legs are still stiff and numb, and as soon as you switch it off, the cold rushes back in like it's been waiting outside the whole time. Rain adds its own misery. A good downpour drums on the armour so loudly you can't hear yourself think, and no matter how tight the seals, water finds a way in. It runs down hatch edges, drips onto the floor, and collects in low spots where your boots splash in it. It mixes with the dust, creating a slick, gritty film that coats everything: your clothes, your gear, the controls. If you open a hatch during rain, you can count on a puddle forming somewhere you can't quite reach to clean. That puddle will still be there days later, smelling faintly of rust and oil. Humidity is the silent enemy. Normandy's damp air creeps into every corner, even when the weather's clear. It fogs the optics, slicks the steel under your hands, and makes every surface just a little clammy. In summer, it sticks your uniform to your body. In winter, it makes the cold sharper. Combined with the body heat of 5 men, it turns the air into a moist, sour-smelling haze that lingers long after you've aired the tank out. Dust storms aren't just a desert problem. Normandy's dry days kick up fine soil that sifts in through any crack. It coats your teeth, turns your coffee gritty, and clogs the fans until they cough out a brown mist. Inside the tank, that dust mixes with gun smoke and oil vapour, creating a smell that clings to your clothes and hair, even after you've left. You stop noticing it until you get a breath of fresh air. Then you realise just how stale it's been. The strangest thing is how fast the weather inside changes. Fire up the engine in the morning chill, and you'll be sweating in minutes. Shut it down in the heat of the day, and you'll feel the temperature drop as the steel bleeds warmth into the night air. Step outside into wind or rain, then back in, and it feels like crossing into a different climate zone. You adapt, but adapting mostly means learning not to complain out loud. The crew all feels it, the sweat in the summer, the numb toes in the winter, the damp in between. You shift in your seat, you roll your shoulders, you wipe your hands, and you keep working. And sometimes, when the hatch is cracked for a moment and a real breeze slips in, you pause just long enough to enjoy it before it's gone and the tank's own weather closes in again. Maintenance on a Panther isn't a neat checklist in a clean workshop. It's a constant, messy wrestling match with 45 tons of temperamental machinery, usually in mud, rain, or dust, and almost always under the clock. The manuals make it sound like a series of logical steps. Inspect this, adjust that, replace if worn. Out in Normandy, it's more like fix whatever's screaming the loudest before the next order to move out. Every crewman has his official role, but when something breaks, and it will, rank inside the tank means less than having 2 good hands and the willingness to get filthy. You might be the gunner or loader, but you're also the guy lying under the hull, knocking dried mud off road wheels with a crowbar. You might be the commander, but if the driver's elbow deep in the transmission access hatch, you're the one holding the lamp and handing him tools. The running gear is your first and most regular enemy. The Panther's interleaved road wheel design spreads the tank's weight nicely and rides smooth when it's clean. The problem is, it's never clean. Normandy's wet soil loves to stick, and once it packs into the wheel gaps, it stays there until you scrape it out. In summer, it bakes hard as concrete. In winter, it freezes solid, locking the wheels in place. Clearing it means chipping away with whatever you have. A spade, a bar, even an empty shell casing, while lying in muck under the tank, your sleeves soaked through. Tracks are next. They stretch over time, and if you don't adjust them, they'll throw themselves off at the worst possible moment. Tensioning a Panther track isn't quick. You have to jack the hull up enough to take the weight off the links, loosen the idler wheel, and then haul the track into the right position before locking it all down again. The links are heavy, the pins are stubborn, and the whole thing is coated in grease and grit that stains your hands for days. Do it in the dark, in the rain, and you'll swear the thing's alive and fighting you on purpose. Then there's the Maybach engine. When it's running well, it's smooth and powerful. When it's not, you're chasing problems that could be anything from a clogged fuel line to a cracked head gasket. The cooling system is a constant worry. Normandy hedgerows shed leaves and twigs into the radiator intakes, choking off airflow and sending the temperature gauge climbing. Clearing them means pulling covers, fishing debris out with your fingers, and hoping you're not burning them on a hot surface. Oil leaks are part of life. You don't fix them all. You just decide which ones are bad enough to matter today. A small drip from the gearbox, leave it for now. A steady trickle from the final drive housing. You get on it before it empties itself onto the road. Either way, you end the day with the smell of gear oil in your clothes and the taste of it somewhere in the back of your throat. Electrical problems are their own brand of misery. The turret traverse motor, the fans, the lighting. Any of them can die without warning. You might spend an hour tracing wires with a hand lamp, wedged into a space barely big enough for your shoulders, only to find a connector that's shaken loose. If you have the parts, you replace it. If you don't, you improvise with wire, tape, or whatever the field repair kit offers, then hope it holds until you can get to a proper shop. Cleaning the main gun is a job no one loves, but everyone respects. Cordite residue builds fast, and if you don't clear it, accuracy drops and malfunctions creep in. You run the bore brush through, working it back and forth until the black smears start to fade, then swab it out with oily rags. It's a slow, dirty process, and in bad weather, you're doing it with freezing hands or sweating under the sun while the rest of the crew clears the spent casings from the turret floor. The worst part is when something breaks that you can't fix in the field. A shattered road wheel hub, a cracked transmission case, a damaged gun recoil system. Then you're either waiting for a recovery vehicle or towing the Panther back yourself, which is risky and slow. In the meantime, you're a 45-ton immobile target sitting in a field or on a road, praying enemy aircraft or artillery doesn't find you. Spare parts are never guaranteed. You might get a brand new component straight from the depot, or you might be handed something salvaged from a wreck and told to make it work. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it buys you a few more hours before the problem returns. Either way, you get used to the idea that maintenance isn't about perfection. It's about keeping the tank alive long enough to finish the next mission. By the end of a day of repairs, your hands are black with oil. Your uniform is stiff with dried mud, and your body aches from crawling, lifting, and hammering at stubborn parts. You'll eat with the same hands you just used to scrape grime from the track links, because there's no time or water to clean them properly. And when you finally climb back inside, the smell of fuel, grease and metal comes with you, clinging to the air the rest of the crew breathes. That's maintenance madness in a Panther. Never-ending, dirty, physically punishing, and absolutely essential. If you want to keep moving, and in Normandy, moving is the only way to stay alive, you do the work, no matter the weather, no matter the hour, and no matter how much the tank seems determined to fight you every step of the way. When things go wrong in a Panther, they don't ease in politely. They slam in without warning and demand your full attention. One moment you're rumbling forward through a hedgerow, the Maybach humming along, the crew going through the rhythm they've done 100 times before. The next, something's not right. A sound, a smell, a jolt. Maybe it's mechanical. Maybe it's incoming fire. Maybe it's both. You don't get a gentle introduction to disaster. It shows up loud and sudden. The easiest wrong is also the most common. You throw a track. It happens fast. One sharp turn, one buried rock, one deep rut, and the metallic bang of a track link coming loose is instantly recognisable. The Panther lurches, the motion goes strange, and the driver's swearing into the intercom before he's even stopped moving. You can't drive out of it. The tank sits there, 45 tons of armoured frustration, until the crew climbs out and gets the track back on. That's an ugly job in peacetime. Under fire, it's nearly suicidal. Mechanical failures pile on in their own way. Maybe the engine temperature spikes into the reds. The cooling fans whine like they're chewing themselves to pieces, and the smell of hot oil rolls forward from the engine bay. You might limp it along for a few minutes, but you know you're gambling every second you keep moving. Or the gearbox refuses a shift, and suddenly you're stuck in second gear while the commander is yelling for you to move faster. Sometimes it's a small electrical fault. The traverse motor cuts out and the turret becomes hand crank only, slowing the gunner's aim to a crawl. That can mean the difference between killing a Sherman and eating a shell yourself. Then there's the kind of wrong you can't fix with tools. Getting hit. The sound of a solid impact on armour is like nothing else. If it glances off, you hear a sharp clang and maybe feel the hull shudder. If it bites in, it's a deep, heavy punch that vibrates in your bones. Spall might spray across the inside, tiny steel fragments ricocheting off every surface. If it's bad, you'll hear hissing, steam from a ruptured coolant line, or worse, the rush of air and fuel mixing where they shouldn't. Fire is the nightmare scenario. Even the best sealed fuel system isn't immune to a lucky hit or a mechanical fault. If flames catch in the engine bay, the first warning is the smell, sharp, chemical, and instantly wrong, followed by smoke curling forward into the fighting compartment. Every man in the crew knows the fire drill by heart. Kill the engine, grab the extinguishers, and get it out before it reaches the fuel tanks. But if it's already inside the crew space, you don't fight it, you bail out. The problem is, the same hatches you use to escape are the ones the enemy is watching. Getting bogged is another killer, especially in Normandy's wet fields. One bad move in soft ground, and the Panther sinks until the belly plates are kissing the mud. The more you try to power out, the deeper it bites. Soon you're immobile, engine straining, tracks clawing at nothing. You're not just stuck, you're a perfect target, and every man inside knows it. Recovery is possible, but it means calling in another vehicle and waiting. Waiting is the dangerous part. Sometimes things go wrong without anyone firing a shot. The radio dies, and suddenly you're cut off from your unit. A minor fuel leak turns major, and the smell alone tells you you're not going far. A hatch jams shut, trapping someone inside unless you work it loose. Even small faults can feel huge when they happen in motion, because inside the tank, you're half blind and half deaf to the outside world. Every decision you make has to be based on fragments of information, most of it coming through the commander's voice. The real danger is when wrong things stack. Throw a track in enemy territory, then hear aircraft overhead. Lose the turret traverse while you're facing an anti-tank gun. Overheat the engine while trying to back out of an ambush. Each problem on its own is bad. Together they're lethal. The crew reacts as fast as they can. Tools out, hatches open, someone on watch while others work. But every second spent fixing something is a second the enemy can close in. When things go wrong, you don't get to stop and think about how unlucky you are. You move, you act, you solve what you can. If you can't solve it, you get ready to abandon the panther and hope you make it to cover. And afterward, when you're safe, if you're safe, you replay the moment in your head, trying to figure out what warning you missed, what you could have done different. But the truth is, in Normandy, things go wrong all the time, and sometimes no amount of skill or caution can stop it. That's the unspoken rule in a Panther crew. The tank is your greatest weapon and your biggest risk. When it's running right, you feel like you can take on the world. When it's not, the world closes in fast. And when the worst happens, you either fight your way out of it together, or you don't get out at all. By the summer of 1944, every man in a Panther crew knew the truth, even if nobody liked saying it out loud. Survival in Normandy wasn't about being the best, it was about being the luckiest. You could have a well-drilled crew, a perfectly functioning tank, and a commander who made all the right calls, and still end up as smoke curling into the hedgerows because the wrong plane spotted you at the wrong time. The Panther was a killer on paper. Its 75mm KWK-42 could punch through almost any Allied armour at long range. Its frontal armour could shrug off most Sherman shells unless they found a rare weak spot. But Normandy wasn't about long-range duels on open fields. It was hedgerows, mud, narrow lanes, and enemies that could appear 50 metres away with a bazooka or Piat. Your supposed advantages shrank fast in that kind of terrain, and all the statistics in the world didn't help when you couldn't see past the next corner. Survival meant discipline, but also restraint. You didn't fire unless you had a good shot. Muzzle flashes gave away your position. You didn't linger in open ground, no matter how tempting the vantage point. You didn't drive into a village without infantry support, because a single man in an upstairs window could end your day. The men who ignored those rules didn't last long. Sometimes even the men who followed them didn't. The Allied air threat was constant. You could hear the difference between a distant bomber and a fighter bomber diving in. The deep growl versus the high-pitched scream. When it was the latter, your survival odds dropped to whatever your nearest cover could give you. A Typhoon's rockets didn't care how thick your frontal armour was. If they hit, they could turn the Panther into a burning trap in seconds. Every crew knew stories of tanks knocked out without ever firing a shot, simply because they were spotted from above. Artillery was another invisible killer. The first you knew of it was the whistling descent, and by then it was already too late to move. Even if the shells didn't score a direct hit, shrapnel could damage tracks, optics, or external stowage, forcing you to halt and repair. And in Normandy, halting could mean dying. You learned to keep moving, even in small bursts, anything to make it harder for someone to pin your range. The endgame in Normandy wasn't the glorious breakthrough the propaganda posters promised. For most Panther crews, it was a slow, grinding retreat as the Allies pushed inland. You might hold a position for a day, maybe two, then fall back under pressure. The roads crowded with other armour, trucks, and wounded men on foot. Each move back carried its own dangers. Ambushes, air attacks, breakdowns. Morale shifted with the terrain. Early on, some crews believed they could turn the tide if they just fought hard enough. By August, the more experienced ones knew the real goal was to get out alive with as much of the tank and the crew intact as possible. That didn't mean refusing orders. It meant executing them with an eye on the odds. You didn't take unnecessary risks. You avoided the fights you couldn't win. You made sure your driver always knew the quickest way out of an engagement, not just the quickest way in. Losses were personal. A knocked-out panther wasn't just a burned shell on the roadside. It was the absence of men you'd eaten with, slept next to, and trusted with your life. Sometimes you saw them bail out and make it to cover. Sometimes you didn't. Crews who lasted learned not to dwell too long in the moment. You kept moving, kept working, because stopping to think about it too much could paralyse you. By the time the Falaise pocket began to close in August 1944, survival odds were worse than ever. The retreat routes were under constant attack, fuel was short, and every road seemed to lead to an ambush. For Panther crews trapped in that narrowing space, there were only a few choices. Fight until you broke through, abandon the tank and slip out on foot, or be destroyed where you stood. Many tanks never made it out, broken down, out of fuel, or caught by airstrikes. If you did survive Normandy in a Panther, it wasn't because you were untouchable. It was because you'd done everything right and the war had let you walk away anyway. You'd lived through mechanical failures, enemy contact, long nights in the turret, and the constant weight of knowing that the next corner, the next field, the next sound could be the end. And you'd done it alongside men who'd endured the same, sharing the same cramped steel space day after day, until it was over, for better or worse. The war would move on, to other battles, other places. But for the men who served in a Panther in Normandy, that summer stayed with them. The smell of cordite, the clang of a shell on armour, the suffocating heat under a closed hatch, those things never left. Neither did the knowledge that survival had been as much about luck as it was about skill. In the end, the tank was a tool, the crew was a team, and Normandy was a test most never wanted to take again. That was life inside a Panther in Normandy, not the glossy images from training films or the grand speeches about armoured might, but the cramped, hot, rattling, stinking truth of living and fighting in one. The outside world might have seen a sleek machine rolling through the hedgerows, its gun cutting through enemy armour, but inside it were sweat-soaked uniforms, rattling gearboxes, endless maintenance, interrupted meals, and the constant knowledge that one bad turn, one lucky enemy shot, or one unseen aircraft could end everything in a heartbeat. Survival wasn't about being fearless. It was about being prepared for whatever came next. Whether that was digging mud out of the suspension, hand cranking the turret in the middle of a firefight, or bailing out through smoke and fire. You learn to eat cold food without tasting it, sleep in 20-minute bursts, and treat every sound outside as either a threat or a warning. And through all of it, you learn to rely on the only constant you had, the other 4 men in the steel box with you. Normandy didn't give anyone a clean victory, and it didn't let anyone leave untouched. For those who made it through, the memory wasn't one of glory but of survival, and of the Panther itself, beautiful and dangerous. A weapon as capable of betraying you, as it was of saving you. The war would move on, but the sound of its engine, the smell of its interior, and the feel of its armour under your hands would never really fade. In the end, you didn't just fight in a Panther. For a little while you lived inside it, and if you were lucky, you lived to tell the tale.